The air in my parents' dining room was thick with the scent of roasted turkey and a lie. The lie was that we were a happy family. It was a carefully constructed fiction, and every year at Thanksgiving, my mother Carol served it up as the main course. The centerpiece of the table was a golden brown turkey glistening under the chandelier, looking impossibly perfect. It was my mother's specialty, making things appear flawless on the surface. 23 relatives were crammed around the extended mahogany table. The low hum of conversation, the clinking of silverware against my grandmother's finest china, it was all part of the performance. I was playing my part too, the dutiful daughter. I smiled when my Uncle Robert launched into his annual fishing story. I nodded when my Aunt Patricia complimented the sweet potato casserole. I was a ghost in a well-practiced play, hoping to remain invisible until the final curtain call. My mother sat at the head of the table, a queen upon her throne. Her eyes sparkled as she watched my younger sister Vanessa recount a story about her recent trip to a wine festival. Vanessa, the eternal golden child, could make a trip to the grocery store sound like an epic adventure. She had that effortless charm that drew everyone in a gravitational pull of charisma that I, the practical, quiet older sister, had never possessed. My father Richard sat opposite my mother, a quiet man who had long ago learned that the path of least resistance was the key to peace in his own home. My mother lifted her wine glass, the crystal ringing softly as she tapped it with a manicured nail. The chatter died down instantly. I just want to say she began her voice, radiating warmth that never quite reached her eyes, how grateful I am to have my beautiful family here today, especially my two wonderful daughters. I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. I knew what was coming. It always came. Vanessa, my mother continued beaming at my sister, you have blossomed into such an incredible woman this year. A wife, a homeowner, an inspiration. You light up every room you enter. She paused, then turned her gaze to me. The warmth in her eyes flickered and died, replaced by something clinical, like a scientist observing a specimen. And Alicia, we are so proud of your dedication to your career. The room was silent. The word dedication hung in the air, a polite euphemism for unmarried and childless. Before I could even formulate a neutral response, she delivered the final blow. Her voice, clear and sharp, cut through the silence. Your sister Vanessa is twice the woman you'll ever be, Alicia. It wasn't a whisper, it wasn't a slip of the tongue, it was a declaration made to an audience of 23. Time seemed to slow down. The fishing story died on my uncle's lips. My cousin David's wife froze her fork halfway to her mouth. I could feel every single pair of eyes in the room land on me. It was the same feeling as tripping in a crowded hallway, a hot, suffocating wave of humiliation. I felt the familiar heat rise in my cheeks, a blush of shame I hadn't felt since high school. My heart started pounding a frantic drum against my ribs. But on the outside, I was perfectly still. Years of practice of swallowing insults for the sake of family harmony had taught me control. My hand, which should have been shaking, was steady as I lifted my wine glass. I took a slow, deliberate sip. I placed the glass back on the table with a soft, definitive click that only I could hear. I met my mother's triumphant gaze. I let the silence stretch, letting every person in that room feel its weight. Then I smiled. It wasn't a real smile. It was something sharp and cold. Wonderful, I said. My voice didn't tremble. It was clear and carried across the suddenly tomb-like room. Then I'm sure she can pay back the $80,000 I spent on her wedding. If the first silence was heavy, this one was a black hole. It sucked all the air, all the sound, all the pretense out of the room. My Aunt Patricia's fork slipped from her grasp, clattering onto her plate with a sound like a gunshot. My father made a strangled noise, choking on his cranberry sauce as he coughed violently into his napkin. Tyler, Vanessa's husband, looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. But the best part, the part I would replay in my mind for months to come, was the look on my mother's and sister's faces. The color drained from my mother's cheeks, leaving behind a pasty, slack-jawed mask of horror. And Vanessa, sweet, perfect Vanessa, looked like she had just seen a ghost. The ghost of consequences. And it was sitting right across from her. No one moved. For what felt like a full minute, the only sound was my father's sputtering cough and the frantic, silent calculations happening behind 23 pairs of wide eyes. The perfect Thanksgiving tableau was shattered, replaced by a portrait of raw, ugly truth. It was I who finally broke the spell. I placed my napkin neatly beside my plate, the linen suddenly feeling like a flag of surrender, or perhaps a declaration of war. "Thank you for dinner, Mother," I said, my voice even. It was illuminating. I pushed my chair back, the scrape against the hardwood floor echoing in the silence. I walked out of that dining room, down the hall, and out the front door without looking back, feeling the weight of their collective gaze on my back like a physical force. The cold November air hit my face, a welcome shock of reality after the suffocating atmosphere inside. I didn't wait to see the aftermath. I didn't need to. I knew their playbook by heart. The first call came the next morning. It was my mother. An apology, of course not. That would have been too easy, too honest. Instead, her voice was a carefully controlled instrument of guilt. "Alicia, do you have any idea what you've done?" She began skipping the pleasantries. "You embarrassed this family in front of everyone. Aunt Patricia called me this morning. She was horrified. You turned a beautiful holiday into a spectacle." "You mean I turned your public critique of me into a public conversation?" I replied, my voice flat. "You are being dramatic," she snapped. "This isn't about you. It's about the damage you've caused. You need to fix this. You will call your sister and you will apologize for this outrageous lie." A lie. That was the official narrative they were building. The $80,000 was a fiction I had invented for attention. "There's nothing to apologize for," I said, "and nothing to fix." I ended the call before she could unleash her next volley of manipulation. My hands were shaking now. Not with fear, but with a cold, hard rage. A few hours later, my phone buzzed with a text. It was a novel from Vanessa. A conversation, I suppose, would have required a spine. "I can't believe you would do this to me, Alicia," it began. "On Thanksgiving of all days. You've always been jealous of me and Tyler, but to invent some insane number like $80,000 just to ruin my happiness is a new low even for you. Mom is a wreck. You're tearing this family apart because you love playing the victim. I don't know what I ever did to make you hate me so much, but I hope you're happy now that you've destroyed everything." I read the message twice. The sheer audacity of it, the textbook gaslighting, was almost impressive. She wasn't just denying the truth. She was rewriting it, casting herself as the tragic heroine and me as the bitter, jealous villain. And there it was. The final brittle strand of hope I'd secretly held that my sister might on some level feel a flicker of gratitude or remorse snapped. Stupid me. I had paid for her fairy tale wedding, and in return, I was being handed the bill for her delusion. The final assault came that evening. It was my father. I thought he at least might be the voice of reason. He was a man of numbers, an accountant. He understood spreadsheets and balance sheets. He understood debt. I was wrong. "Alicia," he said, his voice calm and condescending. It was the voice he used with difficult clients. "Your mother tells me you're still upset. I think there's been a significant misunderstanding here. The only misunderstanding," I said, "is your belief that I'm going to pretend I didn't spend a fortune on that wedding." He sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. "Let's be rational about this. 80,000 is a substantial figure. It's not the kind of number one simply forgets. There are line items, vendor contracts, incidentals. It's a complex financial picture. Frankly, I think you've made a significant error in your calculations." That was it, the key moment. He wasn't just calling me a liar, he was calling me incompetent. He was using his professional authority to invalidate my reality, to dismiss my sacrifice as a mathematical error made by his emotional, hysterical daughter. The man who had taught me how to balance my first checkbook was now telling me I couldn't count. The rage that had been simmering all day didn't explode. It went cold. It condensed into something hard and sharp in the center of my chest. It was the clarifying chill of absolute certainty. They would never admit it. They would never apologize. Their strategy was clear: deny, deflect, and discredit. They had left me no other choice. "You're right, Dad," I said, and the calmness in my own voice surprised me. It is a complex financial picture, and a good accountant always verifies the numbers. I hung up the phone. I walked over to my laptop and opened it. The glow of the screen illuminated my face in the dark room. My expression was serene. All the emotional turmoil, the hurt, the anger, it had vanished, replaced by a singular, focused purpose. They wanted to talk about numbers. They wanted to talk about calculations and proof. Fine, I would give them proof. I moved my cursor and created a new folder on my desktop. I typed out its name. My apartment, usually a sanctuary from the demands of my job, became a war room. The anger that had flooded me after my father's call didn't dissipate, it crystallized. It was no longer a hot, blinding rage, but a cold, clear energy that hummed beneath my skin. For my entire life, my family had defined me by my perceived emotional weaknesses. Now I would confront them with my greatest strength, my mind. At Oaklight Publishing, I didn't just manage procurement, I commanded it. I negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts with paper mills and logistics firms. I could spot a padded invoice from a mile away and dismantle a weak argument with a few pointed questions. My job was to find the truth hidden in the numbers. For the first time, I was turning that skill on my own family. The project due diligence folder was no longer empty. It became the hub of my investigation. I spent the next 2 nights fueled by black coffee and a righteous fury I hadn't felt in years. I printed out 12 months of bank statements, the pages covering my dining table like a paper quilt of betrayal. I pulled every email, every text message exchange with my mother and Vanessa that mentioned the wedding. I created a master spreadsheet, a weapon of my own design. The layout was clean and unforgiving. Column A, date of transaction. Column B, amount. Column C, payee. Column D, stated purpose. And the final, most important column, column E, proof of my payment. Each entry was a small, hard fact, a brick in the wall of truth I was building. I started with the biggest line items, the ones that had made my stomach clench when I'd first approved them, the venue, the photographer, the flowers, and then I got to it, the catering. $12,000. I remembered the phone call from my mother, her voice laced with panic. The caterer they'd chosen needed the full balance paid up front to secure the date, and they just didn't have it. I had transferred the money the same day. I found the record of the wire transfer on my bank statement dated exactly 6 months ago. Clean, undeniable. I found the email I'd sent to my mother with a confirmation number. The $12,000 for the caterer has been sent, I had written. Hope this helps. Love, Alicia. The memory of my own goodwill felt like acid in my throat. Everything seemed to be in order. It was my word backed by a bank record against their lies. But my father's condescending tone echoed in my head. An error in your calculations. He wasn't just guessing. He was confident. Why? Something pricked at the edge of my mind, a feeling of unease. This was the same feeling I got in a negotiation when a supplier was hiding something. The numbers were correct, but the story wasn't. On a hunch, I did something I hadn't done in years. I logged into my mother's email account. I felt a pang of guilt, a lifetime of conditioning screaming that this was a violation of privacy. But that privacy had been violated the moment they decided my bank account was their personal slush fund. They had attacked my character and my intelligence. The rules had changed. I had the password saved from a decade ago when a tearful mom had called me unable to figure out how to attach a photo to an email. She'd never bothered to change it. Some things it seemed were predictable. I typed her name and the ridiculously simple password into the login screen. Access granted. Her inbox was a mundane collection of store promotions and newsletters. I went straight to the search bar and typed the name of the wedding caterer. My heart hammered against my ribs, a nervous, excited rhythm. A handful of emails appeared. Most were confirmations and menu discussions, but one stood out. It was sent from my mother to my father. The date was 2 days after I had sent her the $12,000. The subject line was simple. For the books, my hand trembled as I clicked it open. The email was short. Attached was the very same catering invoice I had paid. The body of the message consisted of only 2 sentences. Richard, I've got the money from Alicia. Here's the catering invoice you asked for. You can use it for the business write-off, just like we discussed. A nice little bonus for us. I stared at the screen, the words blurring and sharpening. I read it again, and a third time. The cold purpose I had felt for the past 2 days was consumed by a sudden hot wave of nausea. This wasn't just entitlement. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a conspiracy. It was calculated, deliberate, and cynical. They had taken my money, a gift born of love and obligation, and used the receipt to commit tax fraud for my father's struggling business. My sacrifice wasn't just unappreciated, it had been laundered. I pulled up the email I had sent my mother, the one with the wire transfer confirmation. I placed the two windows side by side on my screen. On the left, my earnest message, "Hope this helps. Love, Alicia." On the right, her triumphant note to my father, a nice little bonus for us. The architect of the family's happiness, the family failure, the family ATM, and now the unwitting accomplice to their crimes. The knot of anger in my stomach, the one I had carried for years, was gone. It had been replaced by something much heavier, much colder. It was the weight of purpose. This was no longer about getting an apology. This was about discovering just how deep the rot went. And I realized with a chilling certainty that I had only just scratched the surface. The discovery of the tax fraud was like finding a loose thread on a perfectly woven tapestry. I pulled, and the entire fabrication of my family's integrity began to unravel. My investigation was no longer about a single $80,000 grievance. It was about a pattern, a methodology of deceit that I was only just beginning to understand. The spreadsheet on my screen was no longer just a ledger of my losses. It was a map of their lies. With the catering fraud confirmed, my mind immediately jumped to the next major crisis during the wedding, planning the photographer. I remembered it vividly. 2 weeks before the wedding, Vanessa had a full-blown meltdown. The photographer she had originally booked was, in her words, an amateur who didn't understand her vision. There were tears, slammed doors, and frantic calls from my mother about how Vanessa's perfect day was going to be ruined by grainy, poorly lit photos. The solution, of course, was for me to pay for a new, much more expensive photographer. $5,000 transferred directly to the artist's account. It was a rush job, a last-minute rescue, and I had been the hero. Or so I thought. Now, a new question burned in my mind. What happened to the deposit for the first photographer? And what about the event insurance they had insisted on buying? I went back to my mother's inbox, the search bar now my most valuable tool. I typed in photographer and insurance. An email chain between my mother and Vanessa popped up. My eyes scanned the messages, my blood turning to ice. Mom Vanessa had written the insurance form as asking for the reason for the vendor cancellation. What should I put? My mother's reply was swift and instructive. Just write unforeseen professional differences. Don't give too many details. They approved the claim. The check for $3,000 should be here next week. See, I told you everything would work out. I leaned back in my chair, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. It was even worse than I thought. They hadn't just gotten a refund for the original deposit. They had filed an insurance claim. They had manufactured a crisis, manipulated me into solving it with my own money, and then secretly profited from the very problem they had created. They had double-dipped, using my generosity to fund their scam. My mind was racing. This was organized. This was premeditated. And my father, the accountant, the man of numbers and ethics, had to have known. I needed to see how he would react when he knew I was getting closer. I needed to poke the bear. I switched to my own email account and composed a new message to him. I kept the tone light, professional, and deceptively innocent. Subject, wedding budget records. Hi, Dad. Hope you're having a good week. For my own financial planning for the upcoming year, I'm trying to reconcile my records. Would you be able to send me a copy of the final wedding budget summary you put together for Vanessa? I just want to make sure the numbers I have on my end align with the master document. It would be a great help. Thanks, Alicia. I hit send. It was a simple, reasonable request from one financially minded person to another. It was also a lie, a baited hook cast into murky waters. I didn't have to wait long for a bite. His reply came less than 5 minutes later. It was not a spreadsheet. There was no professional courtesy. It was a single, chilling line. Alicia, stop this. You are digging into things that do not concern you. Consider this a warning. My breath caught in my throat. There it was. Not the blustering denial of a man wrongly accused, but the sharp, panicked threat of a man who had been caught. He wasn't trying to reason with me. He was trying to intimidate me. That email was the biggest mistake he could have possibly made. It was a signed confession. His warning didn't scare me, it emboldened me, it told me I was on the right path and that there was something much larger to find. The insurance claim was the key. I needed to see the full file, not just the email snippets. I needed to get inside their system. And then I remembered. A summer barbecue 2 years ago, my father, a few glasses of wine in, was bragging to my Uncle Robert about his new password system. One master password for everything, Richard. Isn't that risky, my uncle had asked. My father had laughed a puff of arrogant pride. Not if it's complex enough. A capital letter, a number, a symbol, and the name of your first pet. Unbreakable, I use it for the bank, for my email, for everything. It's the only way to be secure. He had even winked at me, the responsible daughter who understood such things. A foolish, arrogant boast, and possibly the key to his undoing. I navigated to the website of the event insurance company. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I found the client login page. For the username, I typed in Vanessa's email address. Then my cursor hovered over the password field. My heart was a frantic bird beating against my ribs. I took a deep, steadying breath. Capital letter, number, symbol, and the name of his first pet, a golden retriever he'd loved more than anything. A dog named Buddy. My fingers typed out the sequence, the password I had heard him describe in a moment of drunken pride. My hand was steady now. All the fear was gone. I moved the cursor to the login button. I was standing at the door to all their secrets, and I was about to kick it wide open. I clicked the button. For half a second, the screen showed a spinning, loading icon, a digital purgatory between ignorance and knowledge. In that moment, I wasn't a daughter. I was a trespasser, a digital ghost slipping through the back door of my family's life. The guilt was a faint echo drowned out by the roar of my own resolve. The screen flickered, and the words appeared in a cheerful corporate blue font, "Welcome, Vanessa." I was in. The insurance portal was a meticulously organized digital filing cabinet of their deceit. I went straight to the claims history tab. The first entry was for the photographer. Claim filed 2 weeks before the wedding. Reason for claim: vendor cancellation due to unforeseen professional differences. Payout approved, $3,000. It was all there in sterile black and white print, the lie notarized and time-stamped. My breath hitched. Seeing the raw data, the official record of their fraud, was somehow more damning than reading it in a private email. This was a legal document. This was a crime. I kept digging. The photographer was just the beginning. I found another claim filed the day after the wedding: damaged property custom wedding cake. They claimed the 5-tier monstrosity had been knocked over during the reception. They'd been paid out another $2,000. I remembered the cake perfectly. My cousin David's son had smudged the frosting on the bottom layer, and my mother had made a dramatic show of it, but the cake had not been destroyed. We had eaten it. I had a piece of it in my freezer. There was more. A claim for lost wedding rings filed a month after the honeymoon. Another $4,000. It was a staggering lie. Vanessa's ring was on her finger in every photo she posted on social media. Tyler's was a simple gold band he never took off. They had simply cashed in on their own vows. It was a systematic plundering. For every legitimate expense I had covered, they had created a phantom crisis, a shadow cost they could cash in on. They were treating this insurance policy like a second income stream, a bonus payout for their own wedding. The full ugly picture began to assemble itself in my mind. It was a 3-tiered system of fraud, elegant in its own depravity. Tier 1 was me. I was the seed money, the initial investment of $80,000 that paid for the real tangible elements of the wedding, the venue, the food, the dress. I provided the legitimate foundation. Tier 2 was the insurance company. My funding created the illusion of a lavish high-stakes event, which in turn justified the insurance policy and made their fraudulent claims for lost and damaged items seem plausible. Tier 3 was the United States government. My father used the receipts from my funding to write off expenses for his own business, lowering his tax burden. My money wasn't just a loan. It was the cornerstone of their entire criminal enterprise. My love and my sacrifice had been the fuel for their machine of greed. I pushed back from my laptop and walked to the window, staring out at the city lights. The anger was gone now, replaced by a profound and chilling clarity. I saw them for what they were. Not just a dysfunctional family, but a small, corrupt organization with my mother as the emotional manipulator, my sister as the entitled face of the operation, and my father as the crooked accountant who laundered the money and cooked the books. And I was the silent partner they had swindled. I walked back to my desk. My movements were calm, deliberate, The time for emotion was over. It was time for a strategy. I opened a new program on my computer, a flowchart software I used for mapping out complex supply chains. But this time, I wasn't mapping the flow of goods. I was mapping the flow of their guilt. In a box at the top, I typed Alicia's $80,000. From it, I drew 3 arrows. The first arrow pointed to a box labeled legitimate wedding expenses. The second arrow pointed to insurance fraud with sub-bullets for the photographer, the cake, the rings. The third arrow pointed to tax evasion, detailing the catering invoice scheme. It was a perfect, undeniable diagram of their crimes. My diagram. They thought they had built a fortress of lies. I had just drawn the blueprint for its demolition. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. Demanding my money back was beneath me. An apology was worthless. The only language they understood was power and consequence. And I, their quiet, reliable, and visible daughter, was about to teach them a master class in both. My plan formed not in a rush of anger, but in a calm, logical sequence. I would not scream. I would not cry. I would present my findings. I would give them a choice. Not a choice between right and wrong, but a choice between 2 different kinds of ruin. I spent the next hour drafting the email. Every word was chosen with the precision of a surgeon. The tone was not that of a wounded daughter, but of a senior executive flagging a critical issue. It was impersonal, professional, and utterly terrifying in its formality. Subject urgent meeting request financial. Discrepancy reconciliation. Vanessa wedding account. To Richard Carroll Vanessa. Dear all, in the process of my year-end financial review, a number of significant discrepancies have been identified concerning the accounting for the funds associated with Vanessa's wedding. These inconsistencies require immediate clarification. I have scheduled a meeting to review these findings and discuss a resolution. Please confirm your availability for a meeting at my father's office this Friday at 10 a.m. Your attendance is mandatory. Regards, Alicia. I read it over one last time. Mandatory. It was the perfect final touch. The trap was built, the bait was laid. I attached the simple, damning flowchart of their crimes as a pre-read document. My finger hovered over the send button. There was no hesitation, no doubt. I clicked it. And the architect of their downfall sat back in her chair to wait. My father's office was his kingdom. A corner suite on the 12th floor, it was a testament to the life he had built, or rather the life he had projected. The walls were paneled with dark cherry wood lined with framed certifications and photos of him shaking hands with local business owners. It smelled of old leather and self-satisfaction. I had chosen this location for a reason. A king should be dethroned in his own castle. They were already there when I arrived, seated around the large mahogany conference table. My father was at its head, looking more annoyed than concerned. My mother sat to his right, her lips pursed in a mask of maternal disapproval. Vanessa was beside her, scrolling through her phone, the very picture of bored indifference. They looked like a tribunal ready to pass judgment on their wayward daughter. They had no idea they were the ones on trial. I walked in without a word. I wore a charcoal gray power suit, the kind I reserved for closing major deals. My hair was pulled back in a severe professional knot. I placed my laptop on the table with a solid thud and opened a leather portfolio beside it. I didn't say hello. I didn't ask how they were. I simply nodded curtly. Thank you for coming. The shift in the room's atmosphere was immediate. My father's annoyance flickered into confusion. My mother straightened in her chair. Vanessa finally looked up from her phone. This was not the emotional, tearful Alicia they had been expecting to manage. This was a stranger. I connected my laptop to the large monitor on the wall. The screen lit up with my first slide, a simple, stark title page in a corporate font, Project Due Diligence, Financial Reconciliation Wedding of Vanessa Miller. As per my email, I began my voice as cool and sterile as the room's air conditioning this meeting is to address certain financial discrepancies. For the sake of clarity, I've prepared a brief presentation. My father let out a short, condescending laugh. A presentation, Alicia, this is a family matter, not a corporate takeover. This is ridiculous. On the contrary, I said without looking at him. I believe you'll find it's a matter of meticulous accounting, something I thought you'd appreciate. With a click, I advanced to the next slide. It was the spreadsheet, a clean grid detailing every dollar I had spent, $80,467 to be exact. I walked them through it, my tone detached and factual, explaining each line item as if I were presenting a quarterly report to a board of directors. The venue deposit, the dress alterations, the flowers, the $5,000 last-minute photographer. When I finished, Vanessa was the first to speak. "This is insane," she said, her voice rising. "We never asked you for this much money. You're making this up." "I'm not making anything up, Vanessa. These are documented transactions," I said calmly. My father leaned forward, assuming his role as the voice of authority. "Alicia, your records are flawed. You're emotional. You've conflated expenses. You've misremembered things. As I told you on the phone, your accounting is based on feeling, not fact. Frankly, this is amateurish." He waved a dismissive hand at the screen. "This is not how a professional handles finances." My mother nodded in agreement. "Your father is right, dear. You've always been prone to exaggeration. You need to let this go before you do any more damage." I let their words hang in the air. I let them complete their self-righteous pronouncements. I let them walk to the very edge of the cliff I had prepared for them. They had taken the bait perfectly. I looked at my father. "So to be clear, your professional assessment is that my records are inaccurate and emotional." "Precisely," he said with a smug finality. "I see." With another quiet click of the mouse, I changed the slide. The spreadsheet vanished. In its place, 2 emails appeared side by side on the large screen. On the left was my email to my mother with the wire transfer confirmation for the $12,000 for the caterer. On the right was her email to my father sent 2 days later with the subject line, "For the books." The invoice was attached and the message was displayed in a large, impossible-to-miss font. "Richard, I've got the money from Alicia. Here's the catering invoice you asked for. You can use it for the business write-off, just like we discussed." The smugness evaporated from my father's face. His mouth went slack. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving behind a sickly gray pallor. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp, her hand flying to her chest. Vanessa stared at the screen, then at her parents, her eyes wide, with a confusion that was slowly, horribly curdling into comprehension. The professional mask of Richard Miller, CPA, had just been ripped away, and what was left was a common, petty thief. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the sound of a dynasty crumbling. I turned to my father, my voice still level, still calm, but now with an edge of sharpened steel. "Perhaps you can clarify this discrepancy for us, Dad," I said. As an accounting professional, my father stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish pulled from water. The evidence of the catering fraud, stark and undeniable, had short-circuited his professional arrogance. The king was speechless in his own throne room. It was my mother who recovered first predictably by abandoning logic and retreating to her fortress of emotional warfare. "Alicia," she whispered, her voice trembling with manufactured hurt. "How could you do this to your own father? In his office, this is a betrayal." "Betrayal." I kept my eyes locked on my father. "Betrayal is taking your daughter's money and using it to commit tax fraud. This," I gestured to the screen, "is a business audit." "This is not a business. This is a family," she insisted, her voice rising. "Then you should have thought of that before you turned my love into a line item on your tax return," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Before they could regroup, before my father could find his voice, I clicked the mouse again. The slide changed. "Let's move on," I said, my tone brisk. Item number 2, the photographer. On the screen now were 2 documents. On the left, my bank statement showing the $5,000 emergency payment to the new photographer. On the right, a copy of the insurance claim Vanessa had filed complete with the approval for a $3,000 payout for the cancellation of the first one. Vanessa let out a small, sharp gasp, as if she'd been physically struck. I saw Tyler, who had remained silent and pale until now, turn slowly to look at his wife. "The insurance company," he said, his voice a low murmur of disbelief. "You told me they denied the claim, Nessa. You told me that's why we needed Alicia's help." Vanessa stammered, I thought. Mom said. She looked to our mother for rescue, but for the first time, my mother had no script. She just stared at the screen, her web of lies unraveling thread by thread. "It seems there are layers to the deceit," I commented dryly. I gave them no time to recover. I clicked the mouse one final time. The screen changed again. This time, it wasn't a document. It was the flowchart I had built, a clean, brutal diagram of their entire operation. At the top, a single box, Alicia's $80,000. From it, 3 bold arrows branched downwards. But these individual instances, I said, picking up a laser pointer from the conference table and aiming its sharp red dot at the screen, are just symptoms of a larger systemic problem, a business model, if you will. Let me walk you through it. My voice was steady and clear, the voice of a presenter who knew her subject inside and out. Tier 1, the foundation of the entire enterprise, was my money. It provided the legitimate capital to create the illusion. Tier 2, I moved, the red dot was the insurance fraud. My capital paid for real vendors, which allowed you to file fraudulent claims for phantom crises, the photographer, the cake, the lost rings, turning my contribution into your bonus paycheck. I paused, letting the words sink in. My father looked ill. And finally, tier 3. The red dot moved to the last box, tax evasion. My father used the legitimate receipts paid for with my money to illegally write off expenses for his failing business. Every dollar I gave you was used 2, sometimes 3 different ways. It was a brilliant, deeply corrupt system. I turned off the laser pointer, the red dot vanishing. The problem with your business model, I said softly, is that you swindled the wrong investor. I turned off the projector. The screen went black, plunging the room into a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by Vanessa's ragged, quiet sobs. I walked back to my leather portfolio and retrieved 2 thick, professionally bound documents. I placed them on the mahogany table with a heavy final thud. The sound echoed like a judge's gavel. You have 2 options, I said, my voice, leaving no room for negotiation. I slid the first binder across the polished wood towards my father. Option 1, this is a legally binding settlement agreement, an admission of debt and a non-disclosure contract. You will collectively acknowledge the full $80,000 debt. You will sign agreeing to a strict, non-negotiable repayment schedule that I have already outlined within. And most importantly, you will sign a permanent, legally enforceable no-contact clause. You will never speak to me, call me, email me, or attempt to contact me or my estate in any way for the rest of your lives. You sign this, and this entire matter stays within these 4 walls. I let him stare at it at the sheer weight of his defeat in paper and ink. Then I lightly tapped the second binder still in front of me. Option 2, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. You refuse to sign. In which case, this second binder, a complete notarized copy of every piece of evidence you've just seen compiled for legal review, will be delivered by courier to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and the State Board of Accountancy. The delivery is scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. My father stared at me, his eyes pleading. For a fleeting moment, I saw not the arrogant accountant, but a terrified old man. He was searching for his daughter, the one who used to fix everything, but she was gone. In her place was a woman he didn't know, a woman who had learned her lessons all too well. He slowly, shakily reached for the first binder. He opened it, his eyes scanning the first page. He didn't read it. He couldn't. He already knew what it said. He knew that he was ruined. He uncapped the pen. The pen shook in my father's hand. The only sound in the silent room was the faint, wet scratching of ink on paper as he signed his name, surrendering his kingdom. He pushed the document to my mother. Her face had crumpled, all the fight gone out of her. She signed. He pushed it to Vanessa. Through her tears, she signed her name. I took the signed contract from the table. I placed it neatly inside my portfolio. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. I turned and walked to the door, leaving them sitting in the ruins of the life I had paid for. I left my family in the silent, wood-paneled tomb of my father's career and never looked back. The signed contract in my portfolio was more than a legal document. It was a declaration of independence, an emancipation proclamation for a daughter who had been in servitude her entire life. I walked out into the bright sunshine, and for the first time, the air felt different. It tasted of freedom. 6 months later, I was standing in a space that was entirely my own. A sun-drenched, open-plan apartment overlooking the city with walls I had painted myself and furniture I had chosen without anyone else's input. It wasn't as large as my parents' house, but it was infinitely bigger. It was a home built not on obligation, but on accomplishment. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It wasn't a frantic call from my mother or a manipulative text from my sister. It was a simple, sterile notification from my bank ACH transfer received from Miller Family Settlement Account, $5,000, the first of many payments. It arrived on the first of every month as punctual and devoid of emotion as a ticking clock. It was no longer a gift from me to them. It was a debt from them to me. A cold, hard fact. I didn't need the money. My promotion at Oaklight had come through a direct result of the focus and energy for motion. I now had energy that was no longer being siphoned away by my family's endless manufactured crises. But the payment was a monthly reminder, a receipt for the price of my freedom. Later that week, an email arrived from my Aunt Patricia. She was a notorious gossip, but her heart was in the right place. Under the guise of just checking in, she provided the epilogue to their story that I had never asked for, but had been morbidly curious to read. Alicia, dear, she wrote, I hope you are doing well. Things have been difficult here. I saw Vanessa the other day at the supermarket. She looks so tired, poor thing. She's working 2 jobs now, you know. Her influencer career never took off, and she's waiting tables at night after her shift at the boutique. She said Tyler's band broke up, and he's been driving for a rideshare service to make ends meet. They seem to be struggling terribly. I read the words without a flicker of satisfaction. There was no joy in her struggle, only a quiet, sad acknowledgement of a reality she had spent her whole life avoiding. She was finally learning that life had a cost, and that for most people there was no one else to pick up the tab. But it was the next paragraph that made me put down my coffee. The biggest shock, of course, is about your father. I'm not sure if you've heard, but he sold his firm. A much younger partner bought him out for a fraction of what it was worth. He had to surrender his CPA license over some accounting irregularities, is what Robert told me. They're selling the house, the one you grew up in. It's all very sudden and very sad. Your mother isn't taking it well. So the consequences had come. My father, the man who had built his identity on the pillars of professionalism and financial acumen, had lost it all. He had been so terrified of his business failing that he had resorted to fraud, and in doing so had guaranteed its destruction. They had been forced to sell their kingdom. The home that had been my gilded cage was now just another asset to be liquidated to pay off a debt they could no longer outrun. I closed the email. I felt no triumph, no vengeful glee. I felt a profound sense of quiet. The roaring fire of my anger had burned down to embers, leaving behind not ash and bitterness, but a calm, clean slate. Their downfall was not my victory. It was the natural, inevitable result of their own choices. I picked up my phone again and looked at the $5,000 payment notification. It felt like dirty money, the final toxic link to a life I had left behind. It was a chain I no longer needed. With calm, deliberate taps, I opened my banking app. I navigated to the recurring transfers page. I created a new automatic monthly donation. The recipient was a national foundation that provided legal and financial support to victims of familial financial abuse. The amount was $5,000. The start date was today. Every month, for as long as they paid their debt to me, that money would be silently, automatically rerouted to help someone else break free just as I had. Their punishment would become someone else's liberation. My pain would be repurposed into someone else's hope. It was the ultimate act of procurement, taking a toxic asset and turning it into something of value. I finished and set my phone down. I walked to the large window in my living room and looked out at the sprawling city below. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple. My apartment was quiet. My life was quiet. There were no impending dramas, no panicked phone calls, no hidden resentments. There was only peace. The architect had designed her masterpiece, not the flowchart of their downfall, but the blueprint of her own life. The ledger was closed, and I was finally free.